Hey everybody, welcome to this first video on Colossians. This is the intro video, so we're not actually going to be reading the Colossians letter here. We're going to be just talking a little bit about how and why and the process of how I'm going to read through the book, basically. But if this is your first time here, if you're looking to join in for the rest of it, please like the video and subscribe before we get started. So I've been reading a few books recently, basically on how we interpret the Bible. Here they are, and I've been reading a few blog posts as well. I can put links to them below. And basically, I'm coming to try and figure out a consistent way to read the Bible that we might know what God's words are for us today. And the consistent theme that I think I've found through some of the books so far is that there are two main parts when we come to the Bible and when we read it and we open it. The first part is exegesis, and the second part is hermeneutics. Those are fairly big words, but the exegesis basically means what the passage is saying, what the author originally intended the passage to say in its original context, looking at it for what it is outside of us, but moving into their world and seeing what it is. And hermeneutics would then be the process of taking that and how does that apply to us today? How do we bridge the gap between what it meant then and what it means for us now? So those are the two big things. And so basically to explain exegesis a little bit more, we'd be looking at the process of, why did the author write what they wrote? What was the reason? What was the occasion that they decided to pen these words? Who are they? Who wrote them? What's their culture? What's their background? What's their story? We're looking at certainly if you're going into little sections of the text, what is it in its context? But what came before it, in terms of literary, like. What did the passage before it say? What did the passage after it say? How does the passage that we're looking at relate to the bigger picture of what the author intended to be said? Those are the things that we're looking at when we're looking at exegesis. Why was it written? If it was written as a historical, account, or if it was written as a letter, or if it was written as poetry, we're going to need to interpret those and think about those differently. So that's the main thing to do with exegesis. What did the original author say, and what did they originally intend? But that's really important then, because to go into hermeneutics is to figure out what that then means for us today. And if you don't have a good understanding of what it originally meant, you won't be able to accurately say what it means for us today. And reading most of the books that I've read so far have been pretty clear, like very clear, on the fact that it can't mean more than what it originally meant. There are some caveats to that, but actually what it originally meant to them does instruct and is important for us here and now. And that's the main interpretive factor with which we look through the passage. Now there are other things, like if it's prophecy, then the original thing that it meant to the person at the time may not be the full fulfillment of what that prophecy was meant to happen. We see that in prophecies about the Messianic king, that there's sometimes an original fulfillment of that, but there's also a greater fulfillment of that in Jesus. So we can see, double fulfillment. We can see double meanings to things. But the important thing for us to note is that in general, it means what it means to them at the time, and we apply that to us today. Now, when we've understood what it means, when we've understood what it meant at the time, we then need to begin to look at the bigger picture of what it means in view of the whole story of the Bible. This is really important because when we're looking at a big picture, these books are small kind of collections or whatever they are. They're part of a bigger story which God is writing. So we have the author of the books, or the author of the books, and then we have the divine author of the whole book, God. And what is God saying in the full story? And how does this bit that we're looking at now fit into that story? Now, this is really important because you can have two contradictory statements in a story that were both right at the same time. And to figure out which one is right for you now, you need to know at what point in the story you're in and what commands are relevant for you. A very simplistic example of that would be if you were writing a story and the main character was with someone else, and that person was taking them to their house or whatever, and he says, "Oh, go left here," and then and then a few pages down, he goes, "Go right here." So as someone looking back on the book, and you look back on the story and you say, well, which one is it? In my context now, am I going left or am I going right? The book says to do both things. Well, it depends where you are in terms of that journey that they're on. Depends on which command you're going to take. Are you going to go left? Are you going to go right? Are you going to do something else? It's important for us to know where we are in the story, to know whether the commands and the emphasis of the story that we're reading applies to us and how it applies to us. So that's that. The next thing then to go on from there would be to talk about, for us today as people in the New Testament, reading the New Testament, we are in the same part of the story that they are in. Meaning that, the Bible has this great story of we're in the Garden of Eden, humans have fallen, they have sinned, the story of redemption, of how God is saving us, himself, a people, and he is bringing his kingdom. And Jesus Christ came, he died for our sins, he risen again, and now he's seated at the right hand of the Father, and we are waiting for him to return. But as we wait, we are proclaiming his kingdom, and we are part of bringing in this new kingdom. And we're part of that New Testament story. We're part of the bit between Jesus rising again, Jesus ascended to heaven, and Jesus coming again. So therefore, things that are written in the New Testament are written for us today. They are written for us. We should obey New Testament commands. We should obey New Testament principles fully today, because they are written for us. Now, obviously, they weren't specifically written to us, but they're written for us. Now, there are certain, again, little caveats to that, such as if they were written for a specific person, a specific time, they're not binding for us. I think there's somewhere in the New Testament where, Paul says, "Oh, go get my scrolls from Troas," or something. That was written to a specific person for a specific moment, and therefore it's not applicable to us today. We don't go out and look for those scrolls to give to Paul because Paul's dead, and those scrolls were already brought to him. Probably, hopefully. So we've got to think about that if it's for specific people. But also we've got to think about the underlying intention behind the author's instructions and God's instructions, and we've got to think about their cultural context, because there will be, just because of the nature of human life and human cultures and history, things that mean, symbols that mean certain things in their culture and their context, which do not mean the same thing in our culture and our context. And therefore, if we just cut and paste and obey exactly word for word what they say into our context, we may actually be doing the exact opposite of what the author originally intended, which is why it's so important to get the exegesis right at the beginning. And so, for us to fully obey commands of the New Testament, there may be elements of translation of symbols into our day and age, where we then, once we translated the symbol, can obey the underlying principle. That a very simple way of kind of looking at that for maybe me today in the UK would be the holy kiss. Paul encourages people to greet each other with a holy kiss. In their original context, that would have been affection, that would have been loving, that would have been showing you're part of family. In the UK, that does not mean that. It would be weird if I greeted my friend with a kiss, but it would convey the same message if I embraced someone with a hug. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about there. It might be similar for you in wherever you are in the world. A holy kiss might actually convey the same thing, and therefore you do obey it exactly the same. But we've got to be wary of the context and the symbols and what they mean, what they meant then and what they mean now. So that is my basic kind of what I've been reading through. I've taken that from this How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, and also a blog post by a guy called Andrew Wilson, which I'll link in the description. And that's the grid which I'm going to be reading Colossians through. If you have been reading or listening, and disagree with me or thought I missed something out or didn't explain something so well that you could explain probably a little bit better, feel free to comment in the sections below. You know, with this whole thing, I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm saying I'm on a journey, and I'd love you to join me on the journey. If you've learned something new, why don't you put it in the comments as well? I'd love to know. Anyway, that's me for now. If you haven't, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you next Wednesday. If you want to get a head start, read through the whole book of Colossians. That's what we're going to be doing. So if you want to get a head start, read it all through a couple of times, and I will see you there.